Good evening to everyone. Welcome back to the What's Happening in Myanmar bi-weekly updates. I am Sciortino, the director of SEA Junction, a public venue in Bangkok. We have started with these bi-weekly updates soon after the coup, and the intention is to provide informed, well-documented information to a general public to ensure that the due attention continue for Myanmar. It's unfortunately taking long. We know that the suffering of the people of Myanmar still continue, and there is even a greater need to pay attention to what is happening, as the risk is there that public attention globally is taken by many other things. We are very proud to have with us Debbie Stothard. She is the coordinator and founder of ALTSEAN-Burma, an organization that has been for decades concerned with democracy in Burma. Today, like in the previous updates, we will be discussing both the global setting of what is happening internationally with regards to Myanmar, but more importantly, what is happening inside Myanmar. Please, Debbie.
Hi, Leah. Hi, everybody. Nice, glad to be back for after 2 weeks. A lot of dramatic developments have happened in the past 2 weeks. We've seen an escalation of violence targeting people considered to be pro-junta, supporters of the junta, including the Pew Sortie, which is a militia that has been attacking those resisting the military coup. But more shockingly, on the 4th of November, just 6 days ago, the commercial chief of Mytel, a telecommunications company, was assassinated. This is actually on top of the fact that many civilian administrators hired or appointed by the military junta have been targeted with threats, and some have been assassinated or beaten up by local people around the country as part of anger, but also a strategy to undermine the rule of the junta or its ability to administer the administration, so local administration. So this is actually seems so shocking, but then when you consider that the military has targeted health workers and workers civil servants thought to be sympathetic or participating in the civil disobedience movement, then we saw that some of this retaliation is also in anger against the targeting of civilians by the military. So we see this escalation of violence where because of decades of the military practice of treating civilians, unarmed civilians, as legitimate targets in counterinsurgency attacks and offensives, it's become now normalized that civilian representatives of the military junta are seen also to be targets of a very frustrated and angry population. Now with Mytel, it's interesting to note that Mytel, the telecommunications company, is actually owned by the military, actually relatives of Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, in a joint venture with a Vietnam state-owned enterprise. So we have actually started to see that the range of targets by the resistance, particularly resistance in a country that is more prone to violent means, is expanding to the military, not just the allies of the military or military members of the Tatmadaw, the security forces, but also to the economic interests of the military. And I can remember very early on in this situation in March, April, there were folks saying, "Oh, don't do any boycott, don't do economic sanctions. Tell the population not to attack economic installations." But in the eyes of the civilian population, their means of livelihood have been already very seriously attacked, including arrests of people who wanted to distribute free food to those who were already affected in terms of losing their livelihoods. So people have actually seen their livelihoods and their economic survival under attack in various forms, including by military attack in the country, and they don't see why there's anything wrong with attacking the economic interests of the junta, because they see that the economic interests of the junta, any revenue used by the junta, obtained by the junta, will be used to further attack the civilian population. So we've already seen this escalation, very, very high tension, but also the launch of Operation Anoyata. And yeah, please read the op-ed that Leah wrote recently on Myanmar's military regime has weaponized public health, because they have actually taken over a huge number of hospitals. They've actually raided or occupied 143 hospitals, killed and injured dozens of health workers, and arrested over 200, at least 200 health workers. Sometimes the military even disguised themselves as health workers to arrest people, and even used ambulances to gain entry into civilian areas under disguise. So we can already see these are all war crimes. So the point is, it's escalating. And Operation Anoyata, named after what is often seen to be the most notable king of Burma, is already been launched, targeting the northwest of the country. And we saw very dramatic photos of homes and buildings and churches in Tantlang in Chin State being set on fire, even though most of the local population had already fled. UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Myanmar actually warned that the troop buildup in the northwest, actually there's also a troop buildup in the northeast as well, but in the northwest, is reminiscent of what happened in the lead up to the Rohingya genocidal, the campaign, the military's genocidal campaign against the Rohingya in 2017. So things are getting tougher. And in the midst of all this, there's also been COP26, where we saw the military junta was not able to be recognized as a representative at COP26, but at the same time, the organizers, the hosts of COP26, didn't actually welcome or acknowledge the National Unity Government or civil society representation. So it's a pity, because COP26, because Burma was previously considered third most vulnerable country to climate change, has now actually gained the position of second country most vulnerable to climate change, and more on that later. So we've seen an escalation of violence. We've seen an escalation of violence on both sides, and we've actually we're not going to see an easing of the situation, because the pressure, it looks like some of the pressure on the military junta has eased, even from ASEAN, because ASEAN made the big dramatic gesture of excluding Min Aung Hlaing from the ASEAN summit, but we haven't actually seen a proper follow-up action. The use of that key step has not been leveraged to actually get some kind of effective impact. So I think we do need to actually kick ASEAN up the butt and say keeping Min Aung Hlaing out of the room is not good enough. You actually have to do much more than this. Back to you, Leah.
So I am back here, and I think this is the first part of Debbie's introduction. I am sure there is much more to be said later with the question, but I am going to open the floor, both here as well as Facebook. We are broadcasting also on Facebook, but maybe if someone here on Zoom, if you have any question, please give a sign or write in the chat box, so that we can ask to Debbie.
Well, while you're waiting, let me entertain you with some of the social media materials ALTSEAN produced. Hang on, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Yes.
Okay, here we are. So what we did, because of the lack of visibility of Myanmar in the COP26 agenda, was to produce a series of mini posters that was put out on social media. And it's in 6 languages. There's Burmese and English, of course. And then there's French and Italian and Spanish and Portuguese. So what we wanted to highlight was different aspects of the climate crisis, and to point out very obviously that Myanmar's climate criminals are the military junta. In this case, we can already see that the Rohingya have actually been rendered extremely vulnerable to climate disaster and climate change, because on top of being subjected to a genocidal campaign, the Rohingya and some of the Muslim minorities in Rakhine State who stayed in Rakhine State have been pushed into camps in climate disaster, in climate vulnerable areas of the coast, where they are vulnerable to climate disasters such as cyclones, but also where they can't actually access fresh water that easily. And since the coup started, the military junta has restarted harmful coal mining and hydroelectric projects, including the massive Myitsone Dam. That actually threatened communities already affected by military attacks. And this is where, you know, when we talk about loss and damage and some of the climate justice arguments, we need to understand that climate justice for Myanmar actually means economic justice and accountability for crimes and protection from military impunity. So, and of course, since state grabbing power, the military is essentially abandoned all efforts and all initiatives to protect the forest and protect the environment. So we already were in a very bad situation that within a space of 19 years, Burma had already logged forest cover to the size, 50 times the size of Singapore, and we're expecting that this is going to get much worse under the military. And of course, in Burma, women face disproportionate threat, and that includes being 14 times more likely to be killed in a climate disaster. So we do need to address the climate crisis with a gender lens as well. So I just wanted to share that with you to get the conversation started while people get warmed up with questions.
So we have, okay, we have besides the question of where you live that I have answered.
Why? Why do you need to know?
Maybe want to meet you, but there is a question: which city hospital are targeted by the junta? Why? And what is the impact of the COVID response specifically? You spoke of violence escalating by the public. What are the response of the non-violent civil disobedience, and how effective are they?
Okay. I think if
question later on.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. One of the issues, I think, if you look at our coup watch that's available on the ALTSEAN website, you will already see from the coup watch covering February onwards, there's been and also from our thematic trackers, that there have been targeting of hospital workers, of health workers providing first aid at public events, and where they were deliberately shot. Like there was a couple of very dramatic cases in Mandalay, where a nurse was shot like by a sniper as she was going to help people. We saw at least in one case in Mandalay, they actually threw a grenade. They actually threw and fired into hospitals in Mandalay, and in some of the hospitals around the main protest area in Langtaya and North Dagon and all that, in those places, they were also targeted. So when we talk about the COVID response, then what is very, very clear is several things. The junta actually hunted down Dr. Tata Lin, the head of the national vaccination program, COVID vaccination program. And then when they caught her, they also took her 7-year-old son and her husband and the family dog, and nobody knows where they are now. But Dr. Tata Lin herself was charged with treason, which is punishable with a death sentence. The maximum sentence for treason is death, because she was in contact with the National Unity Government. So we saw that the COVID vaccination response has been abysmal, not been good at all, and that the surveillance data for COVID has been mainly focused around Rangoon, not really in the ethnic areas. So we don't really know the true extent of the problem, and also the very harsh treatment and overcrowding of jails and places of interrogation and other places of detention has made political prisoners much more vulnerable to COVID. In fact, quite a few of them have already passed away because of that. So when we look at the COVID response, then we can say it's absolutely awful. It's actually gotten worse, although the official figures has gone down. If you actually go to Worldometers or the other indicators and look, it looks like Myanmar's COVID situation is much better than Thailand, but we know that that's not true. The other thing too is that because the junta has weaponized humanitarian aid and health services, that more than 50% of people who have been surveyed, members of the public have been surveyed, said that they will not get a vaccination from military. They don't trust the military to be able to take a vaccination from them. So we can already see that a lot of the response has to actually be community-led and community-based, especially through the border-based areas. I think when we talk about the non-violent civil disobedience movement, they're still there, but I think also we lost some of them. When your friends and your colleagues are being shot in the street and subjected to disproportionate violence for being part of a legitimate non-violent civil disobedience movement, then at some stage people will be motivated to defend themselves if they want to resist the coup. And this is why we've seen some of the non-violent movement then join the People's Defense Forces or ancillary support groups to be able to help people on the ground, either by providing a service or finding ways of defending their movement. There are still nonviolent activists around, and they do these lightning strikes and flash mobs. But even lightning flash mobs and civil disobedience and nonviolence direct actions are kind of limited and very dangerous. So I think we are almost about to cross the line where nonviolent resistance is actually going to end up being in the minority, given the scale and the brutality of violence being inflicted across the country. The US ambassador, the US envoy who came to the region, spoke with the Royal Thai government and also with the Singaporean authorities and joined the ASEAN summit, is Derek Shirley. And I've typed his name in the chat box.
Yes, so there was a question that asked about the name of the ambassador that had talked with the Royal Thai government.
Yes.
About the possibility of letting, this is for the public on Facebook.
Oh, sorry.
To allow for aid to be delivered, and also what was needed for refugees eventually being welcomed in Thailand. We have other two questions. One relates to the NUG. I mean, what will be needed for the international community to finally recognize the NUG? It seems that we are not really moving on that. I mean, they are still not recognized. I mean, there are interaction with people of the NUG government, but finally, not only not to allow the youth to represent, which sometimes still happens, I think, by lower level representative. I mean, still international organizations have let this, I am elaborating now on this, but they have let lower level representative to be at international events. But okay, in general, still there is no recognition for the military government, but what can be done, or what will be the criteria before finally the international community will recognize the RUG? This is one question. The second is about the Rohingya in the camps. In the midst of all this, it's already more than 2 years that they are in the camps. And it seems, again, this is another situation which we don't see much change. There is no discussion about relocating them to a third country, or of course it's impossible for them to go back to Myanmar at this stage. So what you think is the future? I mean, just to stay in the camp forever, but the way we know that there is increased violence in the camp.
Yeah, because we lost Mohibullah to an assassination, and we've seen it actually uncovered the fact that there is such a serious threat of violence in the camps. Despite the fact that it's difficult for people to organize, to organize themselves for human rights, to leave the camp. You know, it is a very controlled camp, but then the control doesn't extend to protection of refugees from violence in those camps. So early on in the piece, after the coup, when the military grabbed power on the 1st of February, Bangladesh was quick to say they will work with anyone. They were willing, they basically sent a message that they will work with anyone who is going to take the Rohingya back to Burma, Myanmar. They didn't care who was in charge. They're willing to work with those who offered them the best deal in terms of repatriation of the refugees. Now, it became quite clear that despite all these assurances made by Min Aung Hlaing, who actually even publicly said that the Rohingya situation will be resolved because he was trying to get to hold off international pressure. He didn't deliver on that. And now we've seen this big push for Rohingya to be pushed to Bhasan Char. Remember that Cox's Bazar, where the refugees are being, the refugees have been staying right on the Burmese Bangladesh border, that whole area was actually slated for a corridor of economic growth, of economic cooperation between Burma and Bangladesh. So the Cox's Bazar refugee camp could potentially be prime real estate for economic development projects. So of course, it will be much more profitable to push the refugees into Bhasan Char. But some of the refugees, when we went to Cox's Bazar a couple of years ago, they were saying, no, we don't want to go to Bhasan Char. I hear from this camp, I can see Myanmar, my homeland. I can smell Myanmar. I want to go back. So for some of the women I spoke to, they basically told me that going to Bhasan Char, besides the uncertainty of security, of access to communications and services, going to Bhasan Char is almost like an admission that they will not be able to go back to Burma in the near future. So I think this is something that we do need to understand why there was a lot of resistance to moving to Bhasan Char. But I think the push to Bhasan Char, one way or another, is basically a do or die approach by the Bangladesh authorities, because they themselves know that the Rohingya are not likely to be repatriated under the military junta. Then what begs the question is whether Bangladesh is going to shift its position. Very early on, there were Rohingya diaspora who were keen to sponsor their family members in Cox's Bazar to be reunited with them in various countries in the global north, in Canada, Australia, US, and so on. And actually, Bangladesh refused to allow that to be processed. And they claim that if they allow this type of process to start, then more Rohingya will it will be a pull factor for the Rohingya remaining in Rakhine State to come to Bangladesh in hopes of being resettled. And I think this is a bit of a ridiculous situation, because people, there's at least 750,000 to 1 million Rohingya already, which is pretty much the majority of the Rohingya population, Rakhine State, already in Bangladesh. I don't know who else they think they can pull if they allow resettlement procedures to start. But also there's been a gap. Remember, the Rohingya genocidal genocidal campaign against Rohingya started in August 2017. So 2018, 2019, 2021. So it's already more than 4 years. These people have been in Bangladesh. In the first couple of years, Canada and all these other places say, yeah. If their family who are willing to take responsibility for them, it's family reunion, we don't object. But Bangladesh resisted. Now, as Bangladesh may consider the resettlement, some of these countries have actually also lost their enthusiasm for hosting refugees because of COVID and all the other global uncertainty. So I think we need to understand that. And I think for the Rohingya, they realize that a durable solution requires a reversal of the coup, because the military junta, the illegal military junta, is not likely to allow the repatriation. And now the illegal junta has tried to make some sweetheart deals with Arakan Army and the population in Rakhine State including providing vaccines, etc. And so if they want to keep the Arakan population friendly, then the illegal junta is less likely to allow the Rohingya to return. So we do need to understand safe return of the Rohingya is predicated on their ability to regain their citizenship rights and also protection against impunity and against violence. So, you know, every issue of a bulletin has something about what's happening with the Rohingya, because this is still a burning issue. It's still an important issue. And we cannot afford to let it fade in the face of these incredibly dramatic and threatening developments in Burma.
About the NUG.
What? Okay, it's like
what?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
we have a lot of questions, so you can.
Cool. Okay.
First about.
Yeah. Send all the questions to me. Okay.
First about what you think is needed before finally this international community will recognize the NUG.
Look, if ASEAN is going to be effing unreasonable and refuse to engage with the NUG, it's already setting a very bad message to the rest of the world, who are actually starting to recognize that the NUG has a legitimate claim. You know, ASEAN is so wimpy. They excluded Min Aung Hlaing, but they didn't recognize NUG or welcome NUG to the meeting, not even as an observer to the recent ASEAN summit. But at the same time, the Credentials Committee at the UN General Assembly agreed that they will not replace Mo Chotun, who is actually aligned with the NUG, with the junta proposed representative. And that is a process that's going to go very slowly, because people don't want to rock the boat. The Credentials Committee will probably wait until after this UNGA session to even make a decision. Now, the NUG, I must say that the NUG has actually moved quite quickly. I'm impressed, despite their obvious shortfalls, you know, and the false starts. The NUG was put together in a very inclusive way. They tried to, to be honest, it's the most diverse cabinet in the history of Burma, and includes Aung Myo Min, the human rights minister, who is an out gay man. We saw that quite a significant proportion, there are more women in cabinet, but also there's a lot of ethnic diversity in cabinet. And what the NUG has sought to do is to establish the NUCC, the National Unity Consultative Council, which is actually one of the ways in which civil society, very diverse civil society from different ethnic groups, different interest groups, can also engage the NUG in terms of legislative and policy development. And we saw some of that expressed in the way the NUG formed the COVID task force, which is led by Dr. Cynthia Mao. So we can actually already start to see there is a greater sense of partnership. So if we look at de jure claim for legitimate government, yes, they do have a legal claim. De facto, many people assumed, ASEAN assumed that the military, the illegal junta, had de facto control, but it's very clear now that if you had de facto control of the country, you will not be inflicting 20 lethal attacks a day on civilians throughout the country. You won't be doing that, because this is clearly a case where you are out of control, Min Aung Hlaing. So the military junta doesn't have de facto control, and definitely the NUG has a stronger de jure or legal claim. So what has happened is that they've been operating, interestingly enough, despite the fact that they've been subjected to treason convictions in absentia. that they have had to deal with some very serious physical and political threats, and also some logistical nightmares in terms of overcoming or getting around internet blackouts and being spread out on either side of the country. So, okay, I have a lot of sympathy for NUG. Secondly, most of us don't remember, there was an election in May 1990 in which the NLD won by a landslide. And then the military refused to honor the outcome of the election that it conducted. The military junta conducted an election and then lost it miserably, and then refused to implement the result of the election. So from May 1990, it took until December 1990, 7 months later, for the National Coalition Government of the Union of Burma to be formed. In this case, we saw the NUG formed within 3 months of the coup. When people say, oh, how can we hurry up things? And we have a great sense of urgency here. That's why, we're kicking and screaming and say, more pressure, cut revenue to the military, cut weapons to the military, cut equipment that could be weaponized against the population, stop legitimizing the military, cut recognition of the military, recognize NUG instead. Yes, that's what we're doing. But we also have to recognize that all the approaches, all the coordination, all the actions that have been conducted in this past 10 months. Yeah, it's 10 months, nearly 10 months. In nearly 10 months, in previous times, it took us about 8 years to get to this point when we look at post-1988. So we are older and wiser, maybe not as physically fit, but there's white hair instead of black hair, that kind of stuff. But we have a huge amount of swelling of energy because the protest against the junta in the country was much more widespread and sustained than the 88 uprising. And even the 88 uprising, the 88 generation will admit that the uprising, what we've seen since February is a very, very systematic and widespread sustained resistance, public resistance to the junta, even in places where the junta had no reach, even in rebel control areas, in ethnic control areas, there were people protesting in solidarity. So we can already see, okay, there's hope.
Yeah.
There's hope. We have to push the agenda. We have to say, ASEAN, stop being so wimpy. Actually have proper relationship with the NUG, because to be fair, to be completely frank, the NUG agenda and their policies are more beneficial to ASEAN than the junta. Junta has slapped you so many times over the 5-point consensus. So
we will get another meme. Last time Debbie talked, immediately there was a meme on Twitter of ASEAN with a toilet, to understand why you have to watch the previous episode. So I don't know what is coming out of this after she's saying wimpy. But we have a lot of questions and time now is running. So let me give you this question. At what point, according to international definition, the situation in Burma will be defined as nationwide genocide?
Okay.
Wait, we have more. Let me give you 4 of them, actually. The second one, actually they are already organizing, but how can the Burmese abroad further develop networks and oppose the coup? What they are doing already and what more can be done? And then from Anthony, one of our loyal watcher, How can the Indian government best help? I think India is often forgotten by the analysis of Myanmar. It's always about China, the US, or other party, but actually we know that some of the refugees are in India, and we know also there is some representative there. But so what is the role? How can India what is India doing, maybe beyond the scene, and then what can be done? And the last question about what is happening to civil society inside the country. It's clear that the health worker, like you say, and also like in the article, they are in the front line and they are suffering a lot of abuses. Unions are also very active, but what about NGOs and other media? We know that media is also under attack, but can you tell us more about civil society in Myanmar, those who are still inside?
Okay. When we talk about, the question is how, at one point will we be able to define that define the situation as nationwide genocide? Now, I think you know, genocide became a very emotive and powerful word because people started to recognize what happened in 2017 against the Rohingya was a genocidal campaign. But as early as 2006, ALTSEAN actually produced a briefer that assessed the situation of the Rohingya according to the UN Convention for the Prevention and Punishment and Prevention of Genocide. And we saw that most of the boxes were ticked when it came to the Rohingya, and we called it a slow burning genocide as early as 2006. Now, in practical terms, if we want to talk about genocide, there has to be an understanding that specific groups were targeted because of their group identity. And in this case, the military targeted civilians across the board because they wanted to gain territorial control of the country, and they wanted to shut down the nationwide resistance. What is important to note is that when what the military has been doing is war crime. And in some instances could be considered also crime against humanity. We shouldn't be privileging like, oh, everyone wants to call it genocide because genocide is more serious. War crimes are equally serious as crimes against humanity and genocide. These are all serious international crimes, very serious breaches of international law. And so, we need to understand, since we don't have evidence that particular groups were targeted because of their ethnic or racial background or their group identity or culture, then, what has been happening across the country would actually amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. And you can already see that language. So don't feel like, oh, we have to call it genocide. We actually must acknowledge that what is happening is at very least war crimes and crimes against humanity. What can Burmese abroad do? They've been very active. And what's been quite interesting is that some of the Burmese diaspora have been supporting the NUG in terms of technical expertise, but they have also been some of the loudest voices advocating for the governments in all around the world to recognize the NUG. So they have been working hard and also aiming at cutting revenue through targeted economic sanctions, cutting flow of weapons, and cutting legitimacy to the military, the illegal junta. So they have been active. But also this is an opportunity to be frank, it's also an opportunity for many of these diaspora groups to work more actively across ethnic boundaries in their respective communities, because even in Australia and other places, as recent as 10 years ago, many of the different communities, even refugees from Burma, were still segmented according to their ethnic background. They still didn't work and coordinate so well. So I think this is also an opportunity when they see that there has been inter-ethnic cooperation and more openness to acknowledging and working as though all the ethnic groups are equal by the NUG, then the diaspora needs to take that cue and learn to work better together and in a more coordinated fashion. Okay, where does India stand? Okay, we can say, oh, India, world's largest democracy, blah, blah, blah. Aung San Suu Kyi went to school there. She was friends with the Gandhis. After 88 uprising, the first early years of, in the 80s and the 90s, we had George Fernandez, the defense minister, and various politicians sympathetic to the students, the 88 generation, etc., etc., etc. Now, what got messed up is that India then decided we are competing with China, so we want to be friends with Myanmar. And so let's forget about, democratic principles. And let's not forget that Modi, who's now in charge of the country and wields enormous influence, doesn't give a damn about ethnic minorities, doesn't give a shit about human rights and democracy. He's basically, very often considered the Trump of India. So, and until before the coup, as I think last year, there was already this push that they were going to try and deport and force back Rohingya who were in India. And this was also part of a general Hindu nationalistic push that did not want to tolerate Rohingya refugees who were Muslims and refugees and asylum seekers. And in the COVID environment, we've already seen increased incidents of discrimination against Indian citizens who were ethnic minorities in the northeast of the country. Yeah, in Nagaland, in Mizoram, and so on. They don't look like the typical Indian that you will see in New Delhi, and so they were being vilified and as Chinese and accused of bringing COVID into India. So we could already see there's a lot of threats to civic space and threats to human rights and democracy in India, and then this push to compete economically with China over economic opportunities in Burma, Myanmar. So, where does India stand in this? India is not standing, it's sitting down under Modi. That's the problem. So there on the ground, there's civil society. On the border, there are ethnic Indians of Chin and Mizo background who have family members and extended social networks in the border, in the ethnic areas in the west of Burma. They are providing shelter, they are providing some type of assistance. But I think India needs to step up, because if they are quite serious about preserving their human security in that region, they need to start cooperating with international agencies to allow cross-border aid to take place. So India is not the haven of pro-democracy activists from Burma as it was in the 80s and 90s. Under Modi, under the Modi regime, that's not likely to be the case. But I think it is still possible for key partners or key states to work with India to make the situation less difficult and less unwelcoming for those people who are actually fleeing Operation Anoyata as we speak. I mean, you know, Chin State and Sagaing region have been subjected to some of the worst massacres and military attacks, and the only place that they can run to is India, and we need to make sure that there is a way for them to get to safety. What's happening with civil society inside? They're still there. I cannot believe sometimes, you know, we've been having these online meetings and people are somehow able to find a way to connect, and then, you know, using solar power to keep their phones charged. They would actually use the solar power for charging their phones, then for lighting their little huts, and still hungry to get the information out and hungry to be updated on what's going on. Civil society is still doing a lot of work, but a lot of them have actually become humanitarian workers out of necessity, helping with the COVID response, helping deal with the very urgent humanitarian crisis. I mean, basically UN agencies are saying there's 3 million people in desperate need of aid, you know. That's actually a conservative estimate. And it's actually a lot of our civil society brothers and sisters who have been doing the human rights documentation and getting information out, who have risen to the challenge and started and had to do humanitarian work, coordinate humanitarian work on the ground, help with COVID relief in whatever way they can. They're not just sitting around waiting for something to happen. The reason you haven't seen them that visible, maybe the reason you haven't heard from them that much, is that they are working like dogs to help people survive this COVID pandemic, to get humanitarian aid where it needs to go, to mitigate this horrific nationwide civil war. I wouldn't even say a nationwide civil war. It's this nationwide war, this onslaught of the military, who is desperately trying to gain control of the country by the end of the year. They were supposed to do this in mid-April. They thought, once Tinjan is around, everything will be solved. No, they are feeling the pain, and they recognize also that their military is demoralized. They're trying to push the soldiers many soldiers and police have escaped the military. They've defected. They either ran away and said, we don't want to fight anymore. We can't stand this. We never had to deal with this kind of situation where people are fighting back. Or they are so disgusted by what they've been ordered to do that they join the other side and train the People's Defense Forces. So there's this part. And then what we've seen is the junta telling retired military and police, come back to work. So basically, uncle, grandpa, you're in the military, too bad, you're not too old anymore, come back to serve. And then soldiers' wives have been forced to do sentry duty. It's like, oh, you married a soldier, so it's not enough to do his laundry and take care of his kids and make sure that there's food on the table, a warm, hot meal on the table. No, now you have to actually go and do your husband's job. Go and carry a gun and stand and do sentry duty because there's not enough soldiers to do that work. That's what's happening in the country. So, you know, we have this situation. Civil society is still there. They're still doing their job. Maybe the type of work that they're doing is not the same as we're used to because they have to deal with the reality on the ground. But also, we are having this ridiculous situation where Min Aung Hlaing is trying to push every soldier out in the field and has even forced all the retired, trying to push all the retired service people, the military, to come back to work and forcing soldiers' wives to do sentry duty. So this is how messed up the situation is. Min Aung Hlaing and military leaders know they are fucked. They fucked with the wrong generation by having this coup, and they are fucked now because they even have to get the soldiers' wives to do their jobs for them. So if And they know very well they must try and gain control of the country by the end of the year. If not, they're going to look bad. And I think we need to understand these next few weeks are going to be critical. We got to offer our international pressure. We got to make sure this situation remains visible. Do not let international attention or international fatigue on Burma happen now. We got to keep the attention up. And if you pray, believe in God, pray for our friends inside the country, because they got to last beyond the end of the year. And then we got to tell the military leaders, I'm sorry, Min Aung Hlaing, he's a liability. You want to change the situation? You don't want another nightmare year that you've had in 2021? Get rid of Min Aung Hlaing and start negotiating.
Okay, so Debbie, you are on the run.
Sorry, and I cursed. I'm not a polite Asian lady. Sorry.
Very good ending. Actually, there was another question which relates to your last comment of not letting Myanmar fatigue. Because he's asking, what can the youth in Southeast Asia, this is from an Indonesian friend, what can youth in Southeast Asia do to push ASEAN and their foreign minister to recognize NUG? So how can the youth in other Southeast Asian countries support the youth in Myanmar who is on the front line of this? Maybe a few words on this and then I will conclude. Yes.
We need your youthful energy, because, we got experience and, we have some ideas and we already tested out some strategies, but we need your energy. Keep tweeting, keep hassling people, keep making noise. Milk Tea Alliance has been incredibly inspirational because we see the rise of youth activism and youth leadership in this region. Young people from Myanmar, Thailand, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and everywhere else. Indonesia government needs to hear from Indonesian youth. So do not underestimate the power of your voice. Do not feel segan or krenjai or anade. Don't feel like, I don't make a difference. You do make a difference. And if you need information, go to the ALTSEAN website, get information, put it in your own language, retweet, share the information on what's happening in Myanmar, put it in your national language so more of young people in your country know what the hell is going on in Myanmar, and make sure that they add their voices to this movement. You can do it. I want to see it happening in the next few days.
I think our speaker here has a lot of energy to share in spite of the white air. So I think this is a good ending for our 14th bi-weekly update. We will be back in 2 more weeks again. And we should not forget that during these last 2 weeks also was the anniversary of the election in Myanmar, where people went to vote in large number, and clearly from the election, 90% more voted for the NLD and associated parties. So this is clearly legitimacy of the NUG is clearly documented by, you can also watch in the Irrawaddy, they have a photo documentation of the election, which is quite impressive and clearly show the enthusiasm of the people. So that was 8th November of last year. So 1 year ago, people choose for NLD, and thus of the legitimacy of the NUG. I want to also to share that on the 23rd of November, we will have the opening of an exhibition on women on the front line for a new Myanmar. The exhibition will be on site at the Bangkok Arts and Culture Center. Please do come for those who are in Bangkok, and we will have and launching probably online because the speaker will include people from Myanmar. We are collaborating with the Women League of Burma and also with AJAR in that exhibition. We hope to have Debbie as one of the speakers at the launching of the exhibition. So keep us following and see you all in 2 weeks time. Thank you very much, Debbie.
See you in 2 weeks. Don't forget, same time, same place, 2 weeks. All right, bye. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for coming, and please share with your friend the videos so that more will watch next episode. Bye-bye. Sampai jumpa.
Sampai jumpa lagi.